I think the real bomb in this Cassius story is not just who raised him. That's the surface question. Yeah. That's the thing everybody can point at and say, okay, where did this man come from? Who trained him? Who twisted his head? Who made him memorize science like some walking haunted textbook? But in my opinion, the much uglier question is this. What if Cassius was never stolen from Liesl at all? What if Liesl chose to let him disappear? And I know, that sounds harsh. It sounds almost too cruel, even for Liesl Obrecht. But come on, this is General Hospital. This town has a whole history of babies being hidden, twins being split up, people dying, coming back, names being changed, mothers lying because they think they're protecting someone, fathers being monsters, and children growing up into ticking time bombs. So I could be wrong, obviously. This is just my interpretation. But the more I look at Cassius, the more I feel like his story has to cut deeper than Faison just being Faison. Because if Cesar Faison had raised Cassius, fine, that would be dark, but predictable. Faison was a nightmare. We already know that. If Madeline Reeves sold him, or hid him, okay, also believable, because Madeline was ice cold when it came to family. But if Liesl herself knew she gave birth to twins Nathan and Cassius and then only saved Nathan, oh man, that changes the whole temperature of the story. That makes this personal in a way that hurts. I keep thinking about one possible scene from the past. Not a clean memory, not some neat flashback with perfect lighting. No, I'm picturing something ugly. Liesl younger, terrified, angry, trapped in one of those toxic fights with Faison where nobody is really speaking normally anymore. They're accusing each other, threatening each other, saying things they can't take back. And somewhere in the middle of that chaos are two babies. Not one, two. Nathan and Cassius. Maybe Faison wanted both boys. Maybe he saw them as heirs, experiments, leverage, whatever sick word we want to use. Maybe he already had that Faison obsession running through him, the idea that his bloodline mattered more than actual love. And Liesl, being Liesl, might have panicked. She might have realized that if Faison got his hands on both babies, then both were lost. So she made a choice. A brutal one. Save one. Lose the other. But here's where I get stuck. And this is where the story could get nasty. What if Cassius was not lost by accident? What if Liesl, in a moment of rage or fear, handed him off, left him behind, or allowed someone else to take him because she convinced herself it was necessary? That's the kind of sin that doesn't stay buried. Not in Port Charles, not ever. I feel like Liesl could have spent years rewriting that moment in her own head, because people do that. That's the educational part of this story, honestly. Trauma does not always make people honest. Sometimes trauma makes people build a version of events that they can survive. Liesl may have told herself she had no choice. Then later maybe she told herself Cassius had died. Then after that maybe she stopped saying his name completely. And after enough years, silence starts to feel like truth. It ain't truth, but it feels like it. That's how family secrets rot from the inside. And that would explain why Britt may know something weird about Cassius, but Liesl never openly talked about Nathan having a twin. It's not that Liesl had no memory. Maybe she remembered too much. Maybe she knew exactly enough to be terrified of the full truth. See, to me, Cassius walking back into the story with Nathan's face is not just a twin twist. It's punishment. It's almost poetic in the meanest possible way. Liesl mourned Nathan. She loved Nathan in her strange and dramatic and sometimes smothering Liesl way. Nathan became the son she could claim, the son she could protect, even if she had to do it from a distance. But Cassius? Cassius would be the son she erased, the one she sacrificed, the one she decided maybe in one terrible second was already gone. And now imagine Cassius knowing that. Not guessing, not feeling abandoned in some vague way, knowing somebody told him, somebody raised him on that story. Somebody whispered into his ear for years, your mother picked your brother, your mother let you go. Your mother cried for Nathan but buried you while you were still breathing. That will mess a person up. Straight up. That is not just villain motivation. That is identity damage. If a child grows up believing they were discarded, especially discarded in favor of a twin, the wound is different. It's not only my mother didn't love me. It becomes my mother loved someone with my face, but not me. That is sick. That is heartbreaking. And yeah, that is soap opera gold. Now, let's bring Cullum and Sidwell into this, because I think they are not just side players in this theory. I feel like they could be the people who found Cassius useful. Maybe they didn't create his pain, but they sure as heck could exploit it. That's what powerful manipulators do. They don't always invent the wound. They just press on it until you obey. Cassius working with Cullum and Sidwell makes sense if he is moving like a man with a mission, not just a henchman. He might be taking orders on paper, but I don't buy that he is fully controlled. No way. Cassius feels like somebody who has learned to survive by letting dangerous people think they own him. That's a whole skill. Smile, nod, do the job, collect the information, then use the machine for your own revenge. So maybe Cullum thinks Cassius is loyal. Maybe Sidwell thinks Cassius is a weapon pointed at Port Charles. But Cassius may have his own private target, and that target is Liesl Obrecht. And I think that's where the story can get really twisted. Because Cassius might not want to destroy Liesl quickly. That would be too easy. If he wanted her dead, he could probably find a way. But revenge in Soapland, especially emotional revenge, is usually not that simple. Cassius may want Liesl to suffer by recognition. He may want her to look at him, see Nathan's face, and slowly realize she is not being given her son back. She is being forced to face the son she threw away. Woo, that is cold. That is not just revenge. That is psychological warfare. I can imagine Cassius standing in front of her and letting her believe, for 1 second too long, that Nathan is alive. Letting the hope hit her. Letting her heart crack open. Then he pulls it away. I'm not Nathan. Maybe he doesn't even say it loud. Maybe he says it flat, like he has waited his whole life for that one sentence. And Liesl, for once, has no big speech ready. No grand Obrecht performance. Just silence. That would be the moment where all the old lies start choking her. In my opinion, Liesl's past works best when the show lets her be both a victim and guilty. That's important. Because if we make her only a victim of Faison, then the story is simpler. Faison was evil. Liesl survived. Nathan was protected. But if Liesl also made a monstrous choice, then we get something more interesting. We get moral conflict. We get a woman who loved one child fiercely, but failed another child completely. We get the kind of mother who says she did what she had to do, while the abandoned child asks, had to or wanted to? And that question is brutal. Now, I don't think the story needs to make Liesl cartoon evil. That would be boring. I don't want some cheap version where she cackles and says, oh yes, I threw Cassius away because I didn't care. Nah, that's not it. Liesl is complicated. She can be selfish, dramatic, dangerous, loving, loyal, and delusional all in the same episode. That's why this could work. She may have loved Cassius in that early moment, but fear can turn love into cowardice. Anger can turn a choice into a crime, and shame can turn a crime into a secret. That is where the story teaches something. Sometimes people do terrible things while believing they are preventing something worse. But the child who pays the price does not owe them forgiveness. That part matters. Cassius does not have to be gentle with Liesl's regret just because Liesl eventually felt bad. Regret is not repair. Feeling guilty is not the same thing as making it right. And if Cassius has been raised by someone who fed that anger, then he may not even know what real justice looks like. He may only know revenge. That's where Britt could become important, because Britt is the one who could stand between Liesl and Cassius in a very messy way. Britt has her own complicated history with her mother. She knows what it feels like to love Liesl and also be exhausted by her. So if Britt discovers that Cassius is her brother or half-brother, or however the show frames it, she could be the first person who tries to understand him without fully excusing him. But would Cassius trust Britt? I don't know. I feel like he might see Britt as another child Liesl kept, another person who got a place in the family while he got shipped into darkness. That resentment could be ugly. He might look at Britt and think, you got a name, you got a mother, you got history, I got a lie. That's a rough place to start. And Nathan's memory makes it worse. Because Nathan was beloved. Nathan was the good man, the hero, the son people mourned. Cassius coming in with that face could make everybody compare him to Nathan constantly. And if there's one thing that can push a wounded twin over the edge, it's being treated like the defective version of the loved one. Like, why aren't you Nathan? That question, even unspoken, could poison every scene. I think Cassius might hate Nathan and miss him at the same time, even if he never knew him. That sounds weird, but stay with me. He could hate Nathan because Nathan received the life Cassius believes was stolen from him. But he could also feel connected to Nathan because Nathan was the only person who shared his face, his blood, his beginning. That is tragic. That is messy as hell. And I want the story to lean into that mess, not clean it up too fast. Madeline Reeves still fits into this, but not as the main villain of the Cassius origin. I'd use Madeline as the fixer, the woman who helped bury the record. Maybe Liesl went to Madeline after the fight with Faison, desperate and unstable, and Madeline did what Madeline does. She turned a human crisis into an arrangement. Nathan became Jay. Cassius became a problem to remove. Maybe Madeline knew a person. Maybe she arranged a transfer. Maybe she told Liesl the baby died later, whether it was true or not. And Liesl believed it because believing it was easier than searching. That part gets me. Because how many times in soaps do we see people accept a lie because the truth is too expensive emotionally? Liesl may have wanted to believe Cassius was dead, because a dead child can be mourned in private, but a living abandoned child demands accountability. A living child comes back with questions. A living child says, why didn't you come for me? Cassius coming back as Nathan, or being mistaken for Nathan, gives him the perfect weapon. Liesl's grief becomes the door he walks through. And that is why I think his revenge plan could be more personal than anything Cullum or Sidwell have in mind. Cullum may want information. Sidwell may want power. But Cassius wants confession. That's my take. He wants Liesl to say it out loud. Not in a vague I did what I had to do way. Not with a bunch of excuses about Faison. He wants the raw sentence. I knew you existed. I left you. And once she says it, what then? That's where the story can branch. Maybe Cassius thinks hearing it will satisfy him. But it won't. Revenge rarely does. That's another educational layer here. People think revenge will close the wound. Sometimes it just proves the wound is still open. Cassius may get the confession and still feel empty, because the little boy inside him didn't want revenge first. He wanted his mother to come back. He wanted to be chosen. And no plan with Cullum, no scheme with Sidwell, no fake identity, no science programming, none of that can replace the thing he never got. That makes him dangerous, but it also makes him sad. And I like villains who are sad, not because it excuses them, but because it makes them human. A flat villain just does bad stuff. A wounded villain makes the audience argue with themselves. Do I hate him? Do I feel bad for him? Do I want him stopped? Yes. All of it. At once. I also think this theory could give Liesl a powerful reckoning. Not a quick sorry scene. No. She needs to be dragged emotionally. I mean that in the story sense. She needs to face Britt. She needs to face Nina. She needs to face the memory of Nathan. She needs to face the fact that protecting one child by abandoning another is not a clean sacrifice. It is a wound that multiplied. And I want Liesl to fight it at first. I do. Because that feels real for her. She would deny, deflect, blame Faison, blame Madeline, blame the circumstances, blame the weather if she had to. She would say she was young, terrified, cornered, and some of that may be true, but eventually the show would need to strip all that away and leave her with the one thing she cannot dodge. Cassius survived. He survived without her. He survived wrong, maybe. Raised by monsters, trained by creeps, used by people like Cullum and Sidwell, but he survived, and now he is standing there with Nathan's face and a heart full of poison, asking why his mother never came. That is heavy. That is the kind of GH story that could actually land if they don't rush it. I could be wrong, and maybe the show takes a totally different route. Maybe Faison had another relative. Maybe some secret scientist raised Cassius. Maybe Madeline split the twins without Liesl knowing. All of that is possible. But I keep coming back to the emotional punch of Liesl being involved. Because the best twists are not just shocking. They reframe what we already thought we understood. We thought Liesl's great maternal tragedy was losing Nathan. But what if her first tragedy was Cassius? And worse, what if it was a tragedy she caused? That makes the Nathan return angle hurt more. It turns hope into punishment. It turns Cassius into a mirror. And it gives Liesl no safe place to hide. Because every time she looks at him, she sees the son she saved and the son she damned at the same time. And look, y'all, that is dark. I'm not saying it's easy to watch. But GH has always worked best when family love and family damage are tangled together so tight you can't separate them cleanly. Cassius being Liesl's discarded son would bring that exact energy. It would pull Britt into the fire, drag Nathan's legacy back into the room, make Madeline's old crimes matter again, and give Cullum and Sidwell a reason to look even more sinister because they may be using a broken man's abandonment wound as fuel. So here's where I land. I think Cassius may not just be a mystery man with Nathan's face. I feel he could be Liesl's buried sin coming home. In my opinion, his real mission may not be about poor Charles at first. It may not even be about money, science, or whatever Cullum and Sidwell are chasing. The real mission could be much smaller, much meaner, and much more painful. Make Liesl remember. Make Liesl confess. Make Liesl feel what he felt. And if that is where the story is headed, then this isn't just a twin reveal. It's a mother-son reckoning with teeth. It's grief weaponized. It's abandonment coming back wearing the face of the child everyone loved. And honestly, that might be the most dangerous version of Cassius Faison yet.